going to be hopping out as soon as, now recording. Oh, hey, Craig. We're planning a Dungeons & Dragons game.
D&D.
Yeah, man. Partying like it's 1970-something, getting all together in somebody's basement.
I was about to say, that's older than I am.
Like every group of friends that does, online content eventually has to do a D&D campaign.
Either this or feet pics, and let me tell y'all, I could use a pedicure.
Psychic Dolphin Garage.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode from the Psychic Dolphin Garage. This is the Psychic Dolphin Experience, the show that we run where we bring people on that are hopefully smarter than us and more prepared to talk about things that they are experts and specialize in, because we're all dumb and do not do anything with our lives. Today I have Lee Daugherty. Lee is from North Texas, and you are involved with the DSA. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Lee, you're involved as your precinct chair. You are doing a lot of praxis in your day-to-day life.
I am. Even through COVID and the pandemic and being furloughed at work, it took something that was almost already a full-time responsibility outside of work into even more one during the last couple months. But that's been that way for a number of years, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's awesome. I really think it's such a big step to be going from posting online to actually, having to participate in city council meetings and talk to the people that we relentlessly persecute as being idiots, having to actually deal with them on a day-to-day basis. So mad respect for all the work that you do. I want to talk to you a little bit about it all and kind of get your perspective on, your experiences. I know not necessarily the opinions of the organizations that you're involved with, but really your experience since you grew up here in Texas and since you were trying to help build the revolution in our during this election year.
During this election year. Okay. I just want to know if I had that.
Yeah, I mean, there's larger debates to be had about whether electoral politics is worthwhile. But as far as getting people interested in making people feel like they can participate, like they can make a difference is the most important part, right?
Absolutely, and I think you kind of touched a little bit on it there. I do a lot of electoral organizing, and I am the electoral working group lead for DSA North Texas, and there is a lot to discuss about the usefulness of electoral politics, but I really like the way DSA frames it is there is no part of any kind of power system that you can just cede to the right. And electoral has to be a part of the organizing. It can't be the only thing you do, because I think most people realize, let me take that back. I don't think most people realize that fundamental change of society doesn't happen at the ballot box once every 4 years. It takes building and organizing on a consistent basis. And you see the electoral advocates talk about voting every time and all that kind of stuff, but once again, anyone that looks back through history, especially American history, realizes that any great social advances happen with mass organizing and mass protests, and they don't happen when you just happen to elect someone. Of course, the issues around November and voting with the current state of affairs is another discussion to have outside of just electoral framework, but I think they do go hand in hand, because it also gives you something to do outside of, random 4-year cycle that drives everyone crazy.
Right. Well, and certainly taking advantage of the increase in what people see on Fox News and NBC. It's all just Pete Buttigieg, this random politician that we think you love, has a podcast now. And it's become a spectacle. And I think our position has always been that the way to get people into politics is to find something that matters to people and to build organization, to build community around that. And I would love to hear your experience, what inspired you, what changed your views, what radicalized you into politics, and where do you think you made the choice to end up here, today with the DSA instead of a Biden voter?
Those are not mutually exclusive, those two things. First, I want to ask, does Pete really have a podcast?
I saw a tweet, or it was from The Hill, that said that Pete Buttigieg is releasing a podcast. But it looks like it's confirmed, so it's really great. I love it.
Well, we're going to need to address that at some point.
We're going to need to address it with tar and feathers.
How I got into everything, I I kind of point back, and I think I voted in Obama in '08, and I think I was pissed at him in 12. I don't know. I live in Oak Lawn, which is the LGBT neighborhood, and has a long history of activism and even rebellion many decades ago. It's pretty liberalized now, but I own a bar here. It closed a while now, but thanks COVID. But I owned a bar, and I was just kind of concentrating on my own thing, my own person, and just running the business. And it was only back in about 2015, so maybe 5 years ago, that we had a crime wave down here. And we'd done activism, and everyone cheered marriage equality, and life's pretty good for cis, white, gay dudes, and everything was kind of fine. And then we had a real major crime wave down here in 2015, and right in the entertainment district down here, 30 people were assaulted and robbed. We had literally hate crimes, kidnappings, and like gay bashings on Pride.
Wow.
Really nasty stuff. Box cutter attacks, baseball bats, pistol whips. It really got out of control for a period of 6 months, but I had two workers at the bar that were attacked, and that kind of flung me into a different direction. I'd realized that I had spent 10 years at this bar just concerned with, the 1,100 square feet it maintains, and there was a big fracture in the community where everyone was just kind of felt safe. Obama's in office, we got marriage equality, everything's cool. And I think we got to look firsthand at the violence that is in society, sometimes targeted, sometimes just criminal elements, but it flung me into a spotlight. It was, news. We formed an organization to deal with public safety down here. We quickly found that, a lot of people call for law enforcement when crime happens. We're dealing with that discussion now, of course, nationally.
Yeah.
Flung me into really full-time activists and community organizing because we had to piece together the community, because we realized as an entertainment district, we can't over-police ourselves down here because people get in trouble. The homeless are targeted, sex workers are targeted, minorities are targeted and stuff like that. So we had to be careful, even though there's a huge contingent of society that always calls for that. And we formed the organization called Take Back Oak Lawn, and we tried to really build community through it and directly dealt with businesses to improve infrastructure. When the city does it, it's the failed broken windows policy, but you can actually address a lot of public safety through lighting and basic infrastructure and litter. And if your neighborhood's being forced to do it by the government, then that is a broken window step to gentrification.
Right.
When you're doing it as a community by the people that live there, it's a kind of a self-gentrification and a self-defense mechanism, and we found it very successful. And that organization still exists 5 years later, and we've seen massive crime reductions without law enforcement in North Oak Lawn, talking 40% decrease every year since then, and really no violent crime here anymore. So it's kind of interesting to go from that dynamic 5 years ago and then using kind of what I learned and everything like that, into the discussions about police and what does public safety mean now. And then that kind of kicked it off. Then you had the Bernie campaign.
Yeah.
And I got to blend street activism with electoral politics, and I was living my life in 2016. And I was up at Standing Rock.
Wow.
Trump got elected, and since then it's just been nonstop.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear about. That's not only a great example of direct action that works, but that's also a great example of taking resources, of taking information and giving it to the community, because the community is its own best city council, because it knows what's best for the community. Because everybody knows each other, everybody is listening to each other there, right?
Absolutely, and we found great success with it. And the hardest work, the easy work is to scream, "Where are the cops?" and throw a bunch of cops in your neighborhood and then act like everything's fine and safe. But, the hard work was calling meetings and getting neighbors together, getting HOAs, neighborhood associations, and businesses and organizations back together again, because we used to be a really tight community. And if you look back during the AIDS crisis in LGBT communities, we were left on our own. Reagan's over there laughing at us and all kinds of shit, and everyone's dying. We popped up our own healthcare, schools, churches. We did our own infrastructure. I always call it, we kind of instituted a little communist state inside LGBT communities because the state had failed.
Right. You're forced to create an autonomous zone.
Yeah, and out of survival and self-defense. And I'm not going to relate a violent crime wave to the AIDS crisis. I'm just saying we looked to the past and that history of what we needed to do to build community and defend ourselves once again, because government didn't do anything, and we knew they weren't going to do anything. So we had to build our own self-defense mechanism, and I think that's the ongoing lesson we learn throughout almost everything in history, and especially American history.
So what would you say your political orientation was prior to this 2015 wave of activism that you have been continually involved in now?
Wow, my ideology before 2015, 16, it radicalized me. That was the point.
Yeah.
Before then, I mean, it was just, non-interested, non-news watching, out of touch. I grew up in a household that voted, but God, we never talked about it. Parents are evangelical.
Same.
I never voted for a Republican. I didn't really identify, but it takes a while to shake what your parents' thoughts were.
Yeah.
And then I went through that, big L libertarian phase as a teenager.
Woo!
Where just leave me alone, don't violate my nap.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned, Obama came along and I was like, hey, this dude sounds pretty cool. And literally every president, and I'm 41, but every president in my life has sucked so bad that I just hated all of them. So I just assumed they were all that bad.
Right.
I bought the Obama '08 stuff. The alternative was, obviously a piece of shit. Voted. Once again, I became disenfranchised immediately in 12 and just returned back to ignoring national politics. And I think I remember caring more about local stuff, which probably was an early lesson learned and should be learned by a lot of people, is the president's not going to affect you as much as your city council and school board's going to affect you any given day.
Right. What would you say your orientation is now? Do you want to identify with the label? Give us the spicy tendency bashing?
I'm going to go ahead and put myself out for a little bit of cancel culture here. I'm not a big theory reader. I'm all on praxis side, but I know enough Marx and Kropotkin and all the people to get, I know enough to cosify it and to get out of one. And as I say, but
well, you're involved with DSA, so democratic socialism is kind of the way that it's.
What I usually tell people is, see the overarching umbrella, it's identify as a leftist. I kind of float. The more and more I read, I float between kind of anarcho-syndicalism, communism type as a personal ideology, but I organize under socialism.
Okay.
With DSA, and that's kind of the direction. Of course, you're supposed to go, but that's what I organize under. So I kind of have my personal ideology, and then I realize the need to organize under socialism itself, under the DSA.
I'm, involved with the IWW, and I do prefer anarcho-syndicalism to some extent, but also, the first theory that I've read is the theory that we've read on our reading stream, and I'm like, wow, no wonder people read theory. It's Lenin was right. So I definitely can appreciate I was radicalized by my material fucking conditions. And, that specific to Texas, do you think that there's anything notable about Texas that led you to be radicalized? Something that is unique to Texas that you have found you can exploit when you're going and creating these community projects? That's
a fascinating question. Especially during the work and organizing around racial justice, you always draw a correlation to living in the South. While Texas was part of the Confederacy, things like Dallas had the largest Klan chapter in the nation. Of course, we are known for the assassination of a president. I mean, we've had a lot of extreme right-wing fascist authoritarian politics here in Texas, and the Texas GOP is tweeting Q stuff out now. So, I mean, we are in a very weird situation here in Texas. And, of course, I live in Dallas, which is a predominantly Democratic-controlled county and city, but it's been that way for a decade or so, a little bit longer, than that. But it's stuck in this, and I always call it the neoliberal hellhole, civility politics. And voters that are stuck in their politics being an actual identity. And it's really frustrating here locally sometimes. Dallas is very different from a lot of the other major cities when it comes to activist organizing, because on the landscape, a lot of organizations are very siloed into what they're working on. And I don't know if that's kind of by design, but it makes organizing in Dallas really difficult. It's tough because we saw this in the primary this year, and I think we saw it last time too, is when you grow up in conservative households, when you live in a conservative state, it's hard to shake conservatism. It's hard to shake that ideology. So a lot of our mainstream moderate Democrats in the South are Republicans everywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest dynamic to work through and break, especially in Dallas, is to take a comfortable liberal and move them into radicalization. Now, Trump has done an amazing job at that for a lot of stuff, but I'd say that is the hardest thing to do, and oftentimes there's really nothing to directly point to and say, let this radicalize you, as we're still a red state and the Texas GOP acting like fascists, it's still based in outrage politics. And I think we won't have really good discussions until we actually purple this state, or let's say this year, take the House ledge of the state government.
Yeah, I had never thought of it like that. I guess it's kind of accepted that you're getting pushback from both Democrats and Republicans, but we have our own brand of Democrats here in Texas. Is there, and you said that as you're trying to radicalize them, trying to point out the contradictions of capitalism, that's not good enough to radicalize them because they're not really truly leaning a little left. They're leaning right. Is that push to radicalize them more about education? Is it more about exposing them to these communities that are in need, exposing them to other people in their communities? Is that arguing with them all the time and being right over and over again?
I think it is exposing. And it's one of those things that the left has so much energy to do, is just continually pointing out the contradictions of the economic system, of what it causes, of capitalism. You just keep pointing it out. And, it's kind of that long road you have to go down to where people just really start equating it, because they're not going to pick up a book. They're not going to, hang out in leftist Facebook groups.
Yeah, Lord knows I didn't pick up a book, so why do I expect them to pick up a book?
They're probably not going to change with a conversation, but it's that old thing of just planting seeds. And, you look at the youth and the younger generations, I think you see a lot more of that. And when you start dealing with people that are my age and above, the quote Zennials and the X-Gens, and of course everyone older than that, it's really tough because it's that whole thing of it's the way it's always been, it's the way it's going to be, incremental. It's that comfortable lifestyle. And honestly, the racial analysis of it, this country is very comfortable for white folks. And it always has been and always will be. Even the poor and destitute ones think life is shitty sometimes, but, it's always better than the other person, that we get to blame, depending on the decade in this country. So, it's those kind of dynamics. And that's why, the DSA was really active in the paid sick time campaign here in Dallas and throughout Texas. And we've got to go after the Police Oversight Coalition. There's a lot of members active in the defund APD, Austin PD, Dallas PD. It's getting those wins that change the conditions of someone's life, material conditions. We're going to, march this up a little bit. And then I hope, people will begin to realize that change can happen. And I think it was unique during the paid sick time campaign after it passed. It's unfortunately been injuncted right now. But when it did pass, we were going into fast food restaurants. We were going into random places that have workers that are, kind of tuned out, and that's fine. Letting them know that under this new ordinance, they now accrue paid sick time. So when they get sick, don't come to work and get paid for it. And it was just the look of someone's face. That's something a lot of people take very for granted at their workplace, especially in the service industry. Nobody has paid sick time.
Yeah.
The look of people's faces of oh my God, Atlas just, rolled off their shoulder type scenario of just relief. And I think we have to concentrate on organizing around actual change for people, raising their wages and health care and stuff like that, and probably not deal with fringe issues that politicians like to inflame a lot that really aren't going to change people's lives.
Right, because that is all that politics is about. It's about the most wedge issue possible because that's what makes the most people vocally angry about it. Would you say there's something different about our right wing here? I mean, you've already mentioned that, we have a wonderful, just a full history of just outright fascism in Texas. Something we're all so very proud of here for some reason. Would you say that does translate to our right wingers being different in any particular way from other conservatives around the country?
I think so, but in dealing with like anti-fascist work and knowing history, this really dates back to Confederacy and Civil War, Klan, Jim Crow. These are natural white supremacist extensions of the politics of yesteryear. You saw it in the Tea Party rise that hit Texas extremely hard. And you also got to remember the kind of the class dynamic of Texas is, there's a lot of multi-generation, there's a lot of oil money, there's a lot of white generational wealth in Texas. And these are major power systems. And you have law enforcements like, the Texas Rangers that were sitting here to eradicate every indigenous person and Mexican indigenous people at the time. So, you have a state that's born out of horrific politics that, we go to school in Texas and we're taught the Battle of the Alamo and Texas independence and how fierce we were in stories of Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, and they just skip over the fact that that war was for slavery too.
Yep.
It's the indoctrination of the South is going to take generations still to overcome. And if the discussion starts with statues, which I worked here locally, a couple blocks away here, the Lee statue here in Oak Lawn. If that's where it starts, then so be it. And it was tough. It's tough conversations, but let's have them and force our way through it and be prepared for the white lash that always happens.
Yeah, I think certainly y'all have a little bit more of that like oil money up in Dallas. Here in Houston, we have our black mayor, our Hispanic police chief, who I really just... why? And we got our Christopher Columbus statue taken down pretty easily. We just painted his hands red like 10 nights in a row, and they were like, oh yeah, that's right, the whole BLM thing, we'll take the statue down or whatever. It feels like there's a lot less traction in Houston because we have more like hand-wringing liberals in office, and we are the representation city, and we have taco trucks on every street. It doesn't quite feel as like mask off here as it did whenever I was up in Dallas. But yeah, the lack of knowledge about most historical facts that would just lead a person to going, questioning the narrative that we've been taught, it seems to have been specifically washed out of high school curriculum, out of our education system at all. And, as much as we have like the hand-wringing liberals here, we also have the great example that I use of the Houston Public School that was built in like the 80s and has like the cobbled exterior walls. And then Cinco Ranch High School, which looks like the drive up to Cinco Ranch looks like the drive through College Station as you go up to A&M. And the disparity is as much here, in Houston, in the fourth largest city in the United States, as it is in every other city in Texas by design. And, we run into the barriers of education. We run into the barriers of exposure to alternative facts that we don't get as individuals. I was caught in the Tea Party rise. When I was in high school, there was like a local like Tea Party kids thing that I went to, and they had a bunch of speakers come out. And I don't remember who any of them were, but, looking back on it, it was very specifically built to indoctrinate us further beyond just what we were, what was being left out of our history books. It's a harder battle to fight for these local changes, it feels like, because these are people that you have to be around a lot. It's a lot harder, it feels like, to go out and meet these people, go out and try to form these communities, because we have people that are so against the ideas that we want to spread and so indoctrinated against it, so inoculated even, that, anytime that you're protesting, anytime that you're canvassing, like it feels a lot of times like they have better answers than you have. Is there, I'm sure that you've experienced that as well. Just people that are not willing to even listen to anything that you have to say.
I think there's a psychological reason for that, but I think the conservative right the Republican media machine and Republican politicians have done an excellent job of keeping things simple. And I'm not going to draw conclusions about what a liberal or conservative base can understand or comprehend. That gets down a very dangerous slope of classism and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's not even like the main point. The problem is that like there's a big lie that has been accepted, and now every small lie that relies on that big lie is just also accepted in turn because, well, how could this big lie be false? It's like, but it, what? Wait.
Right,
what?
it's in the education structure, and they've beat the punch. And I mean, once again, I got to point back to like things like the Lost Cause, the Confederacy, and stuff like that. This is the way we're brought up, this is the way we're taught, and the way you're educated. So it's, as an adopted kid, I had to deal with a huge lie at an early age of like, everything you know in life is not really what you think it is. And that's a traumatic and earth-shattering event. And that is not something that most people are willing to put themselves through. So the difficulty of breaking that barrier, and you might think it'd be easy because there's a lot of conspiracy theories and all that stuff, but those are based out of societal problems that we've been trained are our fault, and we need to point somewhere to blame someone. But what you have is this really basic ideology where you have a lot of single-issue voters that are given talking points. And whether it's religion, abortion, guns, it's a very simplistic platform that people can defend, and then their media gives them a lot of ammunition to defend it. But when it comes down to it, if you've grown up and this is the only thing you know, you're going to have to admit your entire life's a lie. And that's a deeply traumatic thing to admit. And it's easier to just stick to what you know and then blame somebody else. And if you can't explain it, then listen for someone that can pop on YouTube and make up a story, and if it makes sense to you, then just regurgitate it. And it's a very dangerous way for a country to live, but I think what you said before is it's kind of by design that way, keeping your populace somewhat distracted or ignorant to what's really going on, and then, have these culture wars about random stuff that really doesn't matter, just deflects from the broader goal of capitalism and, exploitation of the economy.
Would you say that that's the appeal of Ben Shapiro? That's the appeal of anything to justify long-held belief that you have in being willing to debase yourself?
And that's what it's about. And Shapiro is, if you can come off educated, if you can talk fast, if you're a good debater, if you look like you know what you're doing, you can get away with anything in life. Mm-hmm. For everyone else that has a small clue but might not know the entire picture, we're taught to listen, and if it, once again, if it fits into your identity of what you've known and what you've been, quote, programmed with your entire life, if it makes sense to you, then you're accepted as truth, and the people that are telling you things can move you in any direction they want to move you in. And that's the power of these talking heads, because we've all been in online debate with people in a thread, and then you're like, source, where'd you learn this? And they pull out PragerU or Shapiro or, something, and you're just like, well, there's the problem.
Yeah, my mom and I had to have the PragerU talk.
Oh, the PragerU.
I thought that as a 12-year-old, like getting the sex talk was bad. No, the PragerU talk was much worse.
Once again, it's justification of your own biases, mm-hmm. and it's the most powerful thing media can do and online can do. And we search out information to justify what we already know. And once again, you see that in liberals and even left debates too, is you can argue about anything and find an article to support you. Yeah. That doesn't mean your point is right or correct, because we have a wealth of information and, a spectrum of ideology.
Yeah. It sucks that, we don't have media machines. We don't have media frameworks that are designed to get us accurate information. And there's no way to legislate cops to stop them from shooting innocent people. There's no way to legislate large corporations and force them to give us good information. Like even Facebook's like started doing all their fake news bullshit. And it's like, you passed up the problem like years ago, pal. I don't think you realize that, but there's just not a great way now, even, years and years into these large media companies pouring billions of dollars into these platforms in order to spread lies. Like there's no good way to take it back except one small, I guess, solidarity organizing, the same way that the IWW is solidarity unionism. It's the real answer to these overwhelmingly, terrifyingly large structures that we have to fight against.
Agreed, and a lot of times there's a lot of center and even left that approaches things from a reformist attitude, and I think that is possibly the biggest struggle and maybe the biggest conspiracy that we've been taught. I can't remember the quote, but it's the divine right of kings quote and the abolitionist quotes about people always thought the system they're under will always be there. And I think leftists oftentimes either struggle, and this is probably one reason I don't read a lot of theory, is because, academic leftists they're difficult people to talk to. They really are.
Yeah.
And we need to, produce a very yelling, I hate capitalism all the time is kind of good for your bumper sticker, but it really doesn't get to the crux of what the argument is, okay, we have problems. Everyone knows there's problems. And then there's a bunch of people that think you can kind of, keep patching the system and reform the system. And then there's the section that believes you should kind of dismantle it and move on. And it's really kind of language based. We see this in the defund police critiques, where moderates are like, oh, please don't use that word. Let's reimagine what it is, and let's reform them, and let's hire more gay cops. We're stuck in that dichotomy, and instead of discussing what is a society that is post-police, what is a society that is post-capitalism.
Yeah,
I think we really struggle to ask that question to a lot of people. Everyone will agree things are bad and things could be better. But, what is the vision? It's very short-sighted to say, hey, let's fix this, instead of saying, let's look at the larger picture. And once again, I can barely remember quotes, and especially don't remember who said them, but great friend of mine and the best organizer I know, Christian, told me a story or a quote once about the river with cats in it. And the person comes up and pulls the cat out, and another cat comes along and pulls the cat out, and all of a sudden all these cats start coming down the stream, and all these people gather around to pull the cats out, and no one ever bothers to go up the stream and figure out why the hell there's all these cats in the damn river.
Right.
And I think that's something we really struggle with, and a lot of people struggle with discussions, is we're so preoccupied with patching a broken framework, we're not going up the river and stopping it before it happens. And that's looking at generational changes and issues, and possibly working on a policy that might not be beneficial right now, but in 10 and 20 years would change the world.
Right.
You look at universal health care in that thing, and that's why I think it's the most important thing for people to continue to push and advocate for, because I think it would be a fundamental shift and change of this entire society. I really do.
Wow, that is, you really sold us on that there at the end. I like that. I think that's all the time that I need from you. We have really talked about some cool stuff. You have had you've told us some great stories. I loved having you on here. Do you have social media that you would like to plug?
I do. You can follow me on Facebook, Lee Daugherty. I leave my Twitter fairly anonymous, so if you're really smart, you can find me on there, or Instagram if I ever take a good photo. But that's it.
Awesome. And the DSA North Texas, if you guys are Texas listeners want to get involved, that's a wonderful organization. We meme on DSA a little bit, but they're still organizing. If you're going to put your time into something, put it into DSA. Just the same way that I think we're going to have Brandon Buchanan from the Not Safe for Wonks on. He's also the DSA Atlanta chair. These are wonderful people whose praxis we get to talk about here on our podcast. If you have, time and resources to contribute to those organizations, that is a wonderful place. They're doing wonderful things with all of that. Thank you again, Lee, for being here. Hopefully we get to have you on a reading stream. We'll finally force you to get some theory in your body.
Look forward to that book. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And to everyone else out there, y'all have a wonderful day. Howdy, y'all. Don't forget to follow our link tree in the show notes to discover new things like our Discord, social media platforms, and all the places where you can listen to our podcast. Word of mouth is the best way to introduce us and other leftist creators to friends, family, coworkers, your AA buddies. Community is about more than hot takes online. And if you want to support our efforts, you can donate to us at patreon.com/psychicdolphingarage, which is spelled how it sounds. Hope to see you on the stream tonight. Enjoy this music by JJD.
How the fuck I still got a full head of hair? Not a single gray. Fuck the cops, family first, every single day. Bringing a charm when I ring the alarm. My arms got a box cutter and sticky. We gotta abolish hate, we gotta abolish ice, abolish it. No need to apologize, the Holocaust apologists. For no reason we colonized the land and put up monuments. Dope needles, dollar signs, the globe stands in astonishment. I hope there'll be a punishment. I really wanna get bloody. I really wanna stand in judgment of anybody taking money from anybody in the struggle. Anybody on a budget. Poor people getting 10 to 20 for some dumb shit. Corporations incorporating a bloodlet. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words, this coup will not be bloodless. Mark my fucking words.